So, hello and welcome to the 1% podcast. Today we have John McIntosh on the podcast. Myself and John did a little bit of work. We're just saying offline, I think 2-3 months ago now. And so I wanted to bring John back on because I think his story, like the gents that I often talk to, is very relevant to anyone who's watching that's in the vicissitudes, in the thick of it with life, work, business. And sometimes all that can be a bit overwhelming and we lose ourselves a little bit within that, both physically, mentally, emotionally. Not that anything's particularly on fire, but often we can kind of get a little bit lost with how we're feeling about ourselves and how we're showing up. And I think that's a fair story for John. And I know anyone watching or listening will get a lot out of hearing John's story, because I think the key thing is, especially as guys, we often have a lot of this stuff going on. We don't talk about it, we don't share it, and then we don't do anything about it. And that doesn't make us feel great. And so this is kind of an opportunity for us to be able to discuss these kind of things and show you that it's very much addressable and we can work on that stuff. So before we kick off, John, do you want to just introduce yourself, a little bit about you, what you do, your setup?
Well, firstly, I like big words, Luke, and it's good to hear the word vicissitude, which I think I've heard in quite a long time.
It's a favourite that I like that one. It's a good one.
I'm going to be rolling it out from now on. So, I am the co-CEO of a charity that works with teachers globally. I am a teacher by background, high school Spanish teacher for quite a number of years. My personal life, I've got 2 kids who are 4, nearly 5, and one who's just turned 3. And I am based in Northern Ireland, but I'm actually about to move back to London for my partner's job.
So I think a good place to start would be to rewind things back probably 5-6 months, maybe a bit further. You'd, I think, seen some of my bits on LinkedIn, like possibly a colleague or a friend, maybe seen a post of theirs. I can't exactly remember what the initial engagement was, but I think we had a bit of a back and forth. You reached out and then we decided to have a conversation, and then you decided to sort of do a little bit of work on yourself, following the process that I run guys through. What was going on with you back then that made you decide to reach out and go, hold up, I want a bit of help sort of addressing some things that are going on?
I think if there's one word that summarized the experience that I was having at the time, it's probably failure. In the sense that, as you noted, that there's a lot going on, and I guess I felt that I wasn't doing a good job of anything. So I felt I wasn't, doing a good job at work. I felt I wasn't doing a good job of being a father. I felt I wasn't doing a good job being a partner, a friend, a son. I just felt very thinly spread. And very much experiencing that modern world phenomenon of there's just too much, right? And I think I just didn't have particularly good strategies in place for dealing with it, and I was just starting to feel pretty down and bleak about it.
And what you're describing there, John, I think, firstly, thank you for being honest and transparent, because that's the first step. And like I said, if anyone's listening and they're feeling like that, it gives them license to say that's okay. Because I think what you realise is it's not just you, there are others who feel like that. Not that we want to wallow in everyone else's pity, but equally, we all have our own struggles going on. So I think that's helpful. But also, to that point, what you're describing, I think, sadly, is very common. I mean, perhaps I do work in an echo chamber because it's my job and what I do. But I speak to guys every day describing exactly what you're describing, which is through no ill intention, actually just feeling like you're kind of struggling and sort of letting yourself down on a multitude of fronts. You want to be a good dad. You want to be pushing your business forward. You want to be a great husband. You want to be fit and healthy and energetic and thriving. But none of those boxes are really being ticked. And you almost get into a sort of negative feedback loop where you feel like you're kind of letting yourself down on all those fronts. And it's not necessarily that there's one key area that's blazing an inferno on fire, but there's all these just little areas of where I'm not showing up there, I'm not showing up there, I'm not showing up there. And I think that breeds a very uncomfortable feeling of sort of like malaise and happiness, kind of what's it all about. And then underneath this, I think, you haven't said this, but what I hear a lot is this sort of weird dichotomy of like, pretty intelligent, and I think I know what I need to do. Why, what's going on? Like, I've got the first world problems, I'm using inverted commas there. I've got all the trappings of a great life. Why don't I feel great? And so there's this sort of like internal tension of like, it should all be fantastic, but it's not. And why? And does that resonate or make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does for sure. And I think that point about knowing what to do is really interesting. I know you say this quite a lot, that people come and say, "Oh, I know what to do," and you're like, "Well, you don't, because otherwise you'd be doing it." And I think there was a lot of truth in that. I kind of thought, well, I've done all of this kind of stuff in the past. I've been careful, like with exercise, I've meditated, I've done these things, but they'd fallen away from my life in lots of ways. And I think I'd sort of overcomplicated the problem in my head, being like, well, those things obviously don't really work, right? There's something else that I need. But actually, I think one of the things that the program taught me was that the basics are just so important, right? And I think I had certainly forgotten that.
I think that's a common theme, because the gents I typically work with, not all, but a lot, knowledge work. It's quite cerebral. Most of the gents are, not that it really matters, but pretty well educated, or just generally quite successful and clever and forward thinking and all this stuff. And because of that, we have relatively high standards. You also, I think, maybe overcomplicate or overthink what you need to do in order to address the situation. And so, like you said there, actually the fundamentals are incredibly powerful. Be that how you look after yourself, I'm pointing at my head here, mentally, physically, whatever. And it's not actually anything weird and wonderful, but because we're quite clever and because we're successful in other realms, I think we think that what we need to do to address it is some huge existential magical sort of solution. And really, it isn't, right? I think it can feel like a big, large existential problem because of what we just described, but actually what we need to do to address that isn't large, crazy, or life shattering. It's quite the opposite. And I think our egos, I don't just mean you, John, I mean all of us, the royal you, think, don't really like that. It's like, yeah, well, just do that. Yeah, what's that going to do? Well, quite a lot if you give it time.
Yeah, I think there's something in it as well that we all kind of want to believe that we're special and more complicated than other people. And ultimately, we're not, and I'm certainly not. And I think the big thing for me that I've been thinking about quite a lot over the past number of months that the program really highlighted is that there's no separation between mind and body, right? And I think I've always kind of thought you can like think your way out of problems, regardless of how your physical kind of health and state is. But when I look back on my life, like the times that I've been mentally healthiest, or without doubt, when I've been physically healthiest as well. And I think the emphasis of the program in kind of attacking that as well as the mind thing, because it's holistic, right? Like, they feed into each other because they're one and the same. I think being reminded of that was really, really important. And I think that's giving me like a sense of control almost, like over how I feel mentally now, because I can remind myself, oh, the reason that I'm feeling anxious today is because I didn't sleep well, or I drank too much alcohol yesterday, or I didn't eat properly. Like, I can see that much better, that this is what's happening. It's like, well, if I want to fix that, then I've got to, fix some of the like simple things around what I'm doing with exercise, sleep, diet.
I'm really glad you raised that, because I think it's incredibly important. I was actually having this conversation with a one-to-one client yesterday. I'm actually doing a bit of work for his team in a corporate setting. The things that I do within that, not that that really matters, but and we were talking about this very thing. He's had an exec coach for a long time, and it's all been very cerebral and all just up here, stuff, which is fine. But he's like, but I wasn't taking care of myself physically, and so I'm not a PT, but as you know, what I do, there is a physical component to it, because we all walk around in this meat bucket, this body, and to think it doesn't relate to your mind is absolute madness. It's not the only thing, like all things. And equally, if you have got a toxic mindset, you've got repeated patterns of behavior, we need to address those. But if you're 2 stone overweight, smoking and drinking and not sleeping, it's like pushing the fucking boulder up a hill. So it's putting those pieces together. And like you say, it's not an absolute magic panacea, but being in good physical condition has a pretty outsized effect on how you feel. But not only that, certain situations where you're overwhelmed, you're stressed, things are going on, and even if you're taking care of yourself physically, there's things you can do physiologically to control your mind. Andrew Huberman talks about it, much more credentials than I've got, and he talks about, you control the mind with the body. even something as simple as like a physiological sigh, which is a little mechanism you can do to downregulate your system. Now, that will calm you down. And I think for a long time, we've kind of siloed those two things. Like your body is separate from your mind, but it just totally isn't. And so those two things, I think, go hand in hand. And I believe if someone wants to show up, be the best dad, husband, CEO at work, you need to take care of both. You need to take care of your head, but also yourself physically. And I think that the two things are definitely not mutually exclusive. And I think it's important to recognize that. And like you said, you recognize if you look back and join the dots and go, okay, well, the times I probably felt my best, I've always been in pretty reasonable condition. And I don't think that's I don't think that's a surprise.
Yeah, I can completely agree. One thing that I find really interesting lately as well is because I work in education, and there's been quite a bit of research recently and interest in how you promote mental well-being in schools. And there's been quite a bit of evaluation of certain programs that are explicitly designed to improve, children's mental health through like meditation and mindfulness classes in school, but they don't work. It seems so far. And part of why I think that may be the case, which relates to what we're talking to here, is because mental well-being feels like it's something that's emergent rather than something that you maybe target directly by, talking about it too explicitly, right? Like you say, if you target, your physical health and other like small fundamentals, then the well-being kind of takes care of itself rather than kind of trying to, well-being your way into well-being, as it were.
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly right, because recognizing that you as a person or a child or whatever, we're multifaceted and there's lots of things going on, and you can acutely focus on one area, but if the other areas aren't being addressed, then it'll have an effect, but probably not a large effect. And so the quote I talk about or say a fair bit, which is, you're the sum of the parts. And so putting all those pieces together, like if we just went, right, John, all you're going to do is meditate, probably might do a bit. But if then you still are stressed out your head, on your phone until midnight, not sleeping, drinking to manage your stress, it's not going to do an awful lot. Now, you have a bit of meditation in amongst reversing those unhealthy behaviors and having some more positive ones, well, then it will have an impact. It's not to say don't meditate if you are doing all those things, still do it. It's better than not doing it. But I think all of these things need to be looked at within the scope of a kind of a bigger picture appraisal. But then I guess one of the issues there can be, well, if someone isn't feeling the best, like you were, well, where the fuck do I start? And that goes right back to let's just get some absolute basics in. And if we get those basics in, then we can build a foundation. But I think ultimately either people aren't aware or don't realize that the basics are incredibly powerful. And so we go for the shiny thing. I feel shit, so I'll meditate. There's no not discredit to anyone for doing that. Great. But if there's a load of fundamentals that aren't being addressed, we need to do those and address that low-hanging fruit before we look at some of this other stuff. It's not to say none of it's important. It's all important. But there's there's I guess the hierarchy in some degrees of how you're addressing some of these issues.
Yeah, completely. And that kind of prompts two thoughts. So firstly, I mean, you mentioned meditation there. And again, my experience of meditation will vary considerably depending on my physical state, right? Like, so when I'm feeling, physically good, when I've slept well, I think I find it much easier to kind of be present, focus on my breath, to kind of step back and look at what I'm feeling, and just observe it and be curious about it. Whereas like if I'm, tired or whatever, or just haven't been exercising or just been, following per physical habits, then I just get really kind of annoyed when I'm meditating because I'm like, oh, I can't get into the moment. Like I'm not doing this right. And again, you can see like those things are connected, right? Like, so if you want to get the best out of meditation, you've got to do the other stuff, as well.
I think that's a really beautiful allegory, another big word there, for life in general. So for me, so just taking the meditation piece, I think meditation, it's not about how you feel in the moment. It's a compounded effect of what you said there, recognizing we're lost in thought, pulling ourselves back and being able to be objective about what's happening. Now, that as a practice is incredibly powerful for showing up as you want in the rest of your life. Now, let's just switch meditation for I've had something really stressful and difficult happen at work, or my kid's sick, or one of my older parents, something bad's happened. What do? So if you're drinking, stressed, overweight, like we just said, your ability to be calm, non-reactive, and then make a good decision in that scenario and cope and support everyone else and be resilient, I would challenge is much diminished because of your physical and mental state. We flip that on its head and say, you are sleeping well, you are doing some regular exercise, you are taking care of yourself, you're managing your stress appropriately, and then life throws you one of these shitty curveballs. Doesn't stop it being a shitty curveball, but you're in a very different state in order to deal with it. Exactly the same situation, but your perception, how you react, will be, I would challenge, much improved because of the state that you're in. And it's a similar parallel to what you're describing with the meditation. You recognize you're a bit tired, whatever else, but it's the same thing. And so we can't control what happens in our lives. Good things happen, bad things happen. And then if we take that as a default state of shit things will happen and we're going to have to deal with it. Well, for me, what we're describing here about taking care of yourself, being in a better state physically, mentally, it's almost about arming yourself to be able to cope with life. It'd be nice if life's all great all the time, but it's just not what happens. And not to say that, we're going to walk around wallowing in hardships all the time, but hard things are going to happen. And if we're taking care of ourselves, when they do happen, we're better able to deal with them. It doesn't stop them being hard and pleasant or any of those things, but it just means you're better armed to sort of roll with what life's thrown at you. And I think what you were describing right at the start, John, with where you were, when you're feeling like that and then something bad happens, it's just like another boulder. Whereas actually, if as you feel now and you're in a better state and you feel, you're taking care of yourself, you're like, right, this is shit. Right, what we're going to do? I just think that is a way to operate is incredibly powerful. Not that there's any glory in bad things happening, but I think it makes you more agentic and feel better within your life, right?
Yeah, completely. And I think it also leads into possibly the most important thing that I've learned about all of this, which is true self-compassion, right? Because, you were describing there, like when life throws you curveballs and you're better equipped to deal with them. I think that's definitely true. But there are definitely times when I still deal with them appallingly, right? And like, I do make bad decisions.
Ditto. Same.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like, because we're human. But I think I had probably, intellectually understood that self-compassion was about being kind of curious and not being, like just hard on yourself for the sake of it. But I hadn't grasped practically kind of how powerful that is. And the fact that it's not about giving yourself a pass, but it's about being curious about what's happened and then being like, look, you're human, it's happened. You can't change it now. All you can do is move on. And look forward and think about, right, how can I deal with this better next time? Accepting the fact that you'll probably do that again at some point with something, because that is what it is to live.
Exactly. Because sometimes something bad will happen and we'll hopefully act in the way that we like and we're proud of. Other times it won't. A nice example of this is around like kids. Okay. So, and I've used this example before, but they're wonderful, but equally they can be incredibly frustrating and triggering, and they do things that piss us off and wind us up. And we'd like to always be the sort of dad, mom, whatever, that always, you can lower yourself to where they're at. You always meet them where they're at. You don't react. You're great. But that's just not how life and parenting works, right? And so we will snap, shout, and do things where you go, oh, I didn't do the right thing there. But then, like you were saying there about stopping and being curious and going, well, I've now, if I'm being fair, rather than being on my high horse and being the one that's like, I was right and that's it, and trying to just bowl through it and recognize, actually, yeah, they may have been frustrating, but it was a grown up, me. And so then you go, okay, I didn't shower myself in glory there. Let's have a look at what I did and what I'd like to do differently next time. But then also, there's an opportunity for me to show my son, daughter, like actually how a grown up addresses something, corrects it, and course corrects when they have fucked up, and owning that. Because it shows them you're not perfect, but that's okay because your parents aren't perfect and they're never going to be perfect. But shows them how, when something goes wrong, you can rectify and correct that. And arguably that is as powerful, if not more so, because you're teaching them a good life lesson and you're showing it better. So if you can have that curiosity, then when something bad happens or when you behave badly and don't do what you want, which we all will. Like, I think when we talk like this, I'm always at pains to say, I'm not the finished article. I'm not walking around like getting everything right. I get it all wrong all the time. But if you do get something wrong like that, then you can stop and go, hold up a second. That wasn't great. I was probably in the wrong there. What can I learn? And then how can I correct it? And if you do that, then you actually feel pretty good. And so you can turn what was a situation where you didn't shower yourself in glory into something better. But then also in that specific example, you can also help empower your kids, right? And so I think that the words you used there was curiosity to tie into that compassion. And I say this a lot when I'm working with gents, and you saw it in the program, John, as well. A lot of guys will come in, they'll have had a week, something will happen, they'll be beating themselves up, and it's all shit, and oh my God. And I'll go, whoa, okay, let's just take a step back here. That went wrong, yeah, okay, but what about that, and that? Oh yeah, I did all that. Okay, well, let's focus on that. And why did that happen? Well, this, and this. Well, that sounds like a fair reason as to why that happened. So maybe cut yourself some slack and address it. 9 times out of 10, my job as a coach is kind of like metaphorically pulling someone back from the cliff edge and going, wait, it's not as bad as you think. Let's just keep going. But I think teaching yourself that self-compassion, and because the way I approach it is curiosity. I go, well, why did that happen then? Not, dickhead, you didn't do it right. Let's do it better next time, because I ain't going to help anyone. If I go, well, why? And then we sort of pull the thread a bit, and then we get to the root of what's happened. And whatever that is, we can then address it. And so I think having that same internal curiosity to go, oh, that wasn't great, or this is going on. Well, whoa, just let's be curious about this. What's going on? Because I think often in a business setting, yourself and the gents I work with, generally I think we can apply that. Like, let's say it was sales figures or there were some issues there and they weren't looking great. You won't go, right, you're all sacked, we're closing the business. But excuse me? You know, well, what's going on? And what do we need to do? And what do we need to change? And what's that about? And we'd have that and we'd get to the root of it and you'd usually address it. And I think if we can apply that same kind of curiosity to ourselves, I think then you sort of treat yourself as an ongoing project, and we always need to course correct, but then we sort of keep going in the right direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it completely does. And just thinking about kids as well, I mean, yeah, shockingly, I also do get irritated by my children sometimes. Like I react probably quite unfairly to them. But one thing I've tried to get much better at is having that kind of restorative conversation with them where I like lead that and kind of own what I've done and say, you know what, like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. This is why it happened. You know, like, how do you feel about that? And again, it's like feeling that sense of, okay, it's happened now. I can't change that, but what I can do is think about what can I do going forward in order to, you know, maximize the good of the next stage of it.
I think, and ultimately that gives you a bit more agency around yourself and how you're showing up and what you're doing, and that feels better. Well, I think it does anyway, because we're always going to compromise ourselves. We're always going to get things wrong, and that's okay. But then it's like, all right, well, what are you going to do about it? And for me, that's having that little, okay, so what do we do? You know, what can I do across all levels? That's hard sometimes, but ultimately that's empowering. Like, bad things happen all the time, and it will make you react. We can't blame anyone for something bad happening to someone and horrendous things happen. It's not your fault. How you choose to react is. People don't like that, but ultimately it's on you. And so, because then you can basically just say, okay, yeah, no matter what and what. And people don't like that, I think, sometimes, because it's very affronting. But ultimately, it means you're in charge. And so it's kind of like taking responsibility for oneself no matter what happens. It doesn't mean that the thing that's happened isn't unpleasant or scary or nasty or fair. But at some point, it's like, and what are you going to do? And I think to be in the state to say, and what are we going to do? You're not going to do that very well when you are overwhelmed, overweight, stressed. Exactly. So if we're able to take care of ourselves better, it means when we're put in these horrible situations sometimes, or tricky situations, or difficult situations, or kids are testing us, hopefully we're going to make better decisions off the back of that.
Yeah. And I think what you said there about confronting the reality that, you know, it's your fault, but there's a lot you can do about that was for me quite liberating. One of the things I found quite refreshing about your posts and material, right? Because I mean, you see LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is like a cesspit, I think, of toxic positivity at times, and you know, all this like hacks and productivity stuff, and it just feels very, very inauthentic to me. Whereas I quite liked kind of the directness and authenticity of your posts, and I was like, you know what, like, he's right, like this is true. Um, So I definitely see why some people find it affronting. But for me, that was actually quite liberating just to read that.
Yeah. Well, the first time I sort of, because I've been doing lots of work on myself for a long time, but when that concept of it's like it's your fault, and I'd never really got it, and I was like, hold up, what? And then when it clicks, you're like, ah, and like you said, it's liberating because it's okay. Well, I'm responsible, but that's empowering. There's a quote that I say a lot, which is, "You are the problem, but you're also the solution." I mean, that's beautiful because then okay, well, we can do something now. Depending on what's happened, what you do might be tiny and diminished, but there's usually always something. You know, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, he got meaning and he applied that in a concentration camp. Like that's, you can't really get another level of like how much he's had taken from him, but he still had the ability to choose how he was going to perceive his situation. And for him, that was, so then he's still in charge. Now, that's a very, very extreme example, but it kind of plays out how we can do that. And so if you play that out, there is always something we can do. And that might just be to choose to not do something or choose how to think or choose how to react. But then the ball's in your court. And I think that we feel better like that. Being a victim doesn't feel nice. It's not great because you've got no agency. And so if you can, again, I'm not blaming, things happen that make people victims sometimes. But at some point, if we can turn that around and go, well, actually, I'm not anymore because I can do something, that you feel better, you know?
Yeah, I think this term agency is so important. And what you say about control there as well, because control isn't about being able to control like outcomes, right? But it's being able to control how you respond to a particular situation. And I think, a lot of what I do in my day-to-day job is thinking about how do we apply what we know from like psychological research about motivation to teachers to, keep them in the profession, to excite them in their jobs and whatnot. And autonomy and agency are such an important thing, but it's not about like having complete control over stuff. It's about psychologically feeling that you're in control of your own response to things. And that
Exactly.
is.
And the terms like burnout, overwhelm, they come from feeling like you don't have control or autonomy. It feels like everything's out of control, and that doesn't feel good. And you can't control everything, and you can't control how people are going to react, but you can control how you communicate with someone. You can control how honest you're going to be with someone in those interactions. And so they're the bits we can control. It's not your job to control how someone's going to react. You don't know. You don't know what they're thinking, and why should you? But you can only communicate what you're going to do and what you're going to say. And I think again that feels agentic or like you're in control, which I think's the main thing. Well, look, John, I don't want to cannibalize too much of your time because I know you're a very busy man. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been great. I think we've sort of covered all sorts of different points, and I could sit and chat about this for hours and hours and hours, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Before we jump off, do you have any parting thoughts or comments for anyone listening?
I think if you feel that you are struggling a bit and you feel similarly to this, then reach out. It's definitely worth doing. And to build on that last point about control, there are things that you can do, right, that will not will not be hugely overwhelming, will not kind of require like all of your energy and attention to do. Simple things that you can get some like structured support for that can make a big difference. So
Thanks, John. It's really helpful to hear. And whether that's to work with someone like me or not, regardless, like you just said, there is definitely something you can do. And the whole you are the problem, but you would genuinely are the solution. And once you can build some steps to realize that, it feels really good. So, John, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation. I will have to put you on again in a year's time just to have a chat because I really enjoyed this chat and I could talk about this kind of stuff day in, day out. If anyone is watching and listening and you're interested about how I can help or what I could do, please drop a note in the comments or find me a DM. Otherwise, again, thank you, John, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, guys.
cheers, Luke.